Hi everyone. This week you've been working on the intrinsic conduction system and the cardiac cycle, and this video is to help you pull those things together. So here's an illustration that shows both the electrical activity of the heart and the mechanical activity of the heart. The electrical activity of the heart is what happens with the intrinsic conduction system, right? The SA node, the AV node, the bundle branches, and Purkinje fibers. So hopefully through the work that you've done, you have gained an understanding of what you're seeing when you look at an EKG reading. I'm just going to review it quickly so we are all on the same page. So here's that P wave, and that P wave is when the atria are depolarizing. So atria are the upper chambers. Depolarization is that action potential that gets sent through those pacemaker cells. Okay? Um, and this is just like any other action potential. It's going to tell something to do something. And in this case, it tells the cardiomyocytes of the atria to contract. So the signal gets sent through the atria. That's what we're seeing in this P wave, and the atria contract. So this kind of flat line right here is giving time for the atria to contract. The QRS complex is where the ventricles depolarize. And when the ventricles depolarize, it tells the cardiomyocytes of the ventricles to contract. So here's that signal, and somewhere around here they start to contract. And then the last part is the T wave, and that's ventricular repolarization. It's allowing the membrane potential of the ventricles to return back to that pacemaker potential. So you may be wondering why you don't see a wave for atrial repolarization, and that's just because it's hidden in this QRX complex. There's so much more activity going on in the ventricles than in the atria at that time that we don't see it. So here's a little animation of that process. So we can see the EKG here, the P, QRS, and T, and we can see what's happening in the heart. So the red is the electrical signal, and we see the atria depolarize, followed by atrial contraction. Then we have the ventricles depolarizing, followed by ventricular contraction. This is another way of showing that. So here is that P wave, and here is the illustration of the atrial contracting. Here is the QRS complex and the ventricular contraction illustration. And here is the T wave and ventricular diastole, right? So whenever I'm saying contraction, I could also be saying systole. When I'm saying relaxation, I could be saying diastole, right? They mean the same thing. Let's walk through the cardiac cycle, which is the sequence of events that happens during each heartbeat. We're going to focus on what's happening both in the chambers and the valves of the heart during each phase. The cardiac cycle starts with ventricular filling. During this phase, the heart is relaxed and blood is flowing passively from the atria into the ventricles. The AV valves, the tricuspid and the bicuspid, are open, right? So blood can go from the atria to the ventricles. But currently, the semilunar valves, pulmonary and aortic valves, are closed, so no blood is going out of the heart yet. The next phase, we have the atria contracting, pushing the last bits of blood that are in the atria into the ventricles. Here, the AV valves are still open, and the semilunar valves are still closed. This completes the filling of the ventricles and sets us up for getting blood out of the heart and into the pulmonary and systemic circuits. The third phase is ventricular systole, so ventricular contraction. And we talk about early ventricular systole and late ventricular systole because there's different things happening in each phase. So ventricular systole is contraction, right? As the ventricles contract, at first all the valves are closed, right? So the semilunar valves have been closed all along, but now the AV valves are closed because the pressure in the ventricles pushes against them. And since they are backflow valves, when they have pressure pushing against them, they close. When they close, that's that first heart sound, that lub, okay, of the lub dub. And this gives us a state called isovolumetric contraction. It's when all the valves of the heart are closed. And so the blood in the ventricles is isolated, right? So isovolumetric contraction. The next part of ventricular systole is going to be the injection phase. So this is when blood leaves the heart through the pulmonary arteries and the aorta, right? So as pressure rises, the pressure in the ventricles is going to push against the semilunar valves and open those valves up. And that's what allows blood to leave the heart. So once blood is ejected from the heart to the body and to the lungs, we move into the last phase, which is isovolumetric relaxation. So ventricles have ejected the blood and they start to relax. And as pressure inside the ventricles drops, the semilunar valves are going to close to prevent backflow back into the heart. And that's that second sound. That's the dub of the lub dub of the heartbeat. And there's this brief moment where all valves are closed again, and that's called isovolumetric relaxation. And then the pressure in the atria starts to rise. Eventually, the pressure is going to open those AV valves again, and you return to ventricular filling, so the cycle repeats. I hope this explanation of the cardiac cycle is helpful for you. And as you're working through this, really try to connect. Okay, so when the atria depolarizes, that P wave, that's followed by atrial contraction. When the QRS complex happens, that ventricular depolarization, that's going to be followed by ventricular contraction. Okay, so tying those two things together is really important in getting a grasp of all the information in this chapter and how the heart functions. I hope this is helpful. I will keep an eye out for questions over the course of the weekend and look forward to chatting with you soon.